Gurmagad Ceann Comhairle dús Cogarjacus Mór to our new Uachtaráin Heron Catherine Connolly on her historic landslide win. I know as President she will do us proud, just as Michael D. Higgins has done. I also want to acknowledge Ceann Comhairle the loss of the great sister Stan. She did the state immense service through her work on social justice, and she leaves a truly remarkable legacy. May she rest in peace. Minister Chambers, I want to condemn in the strongest possible terms the attack on an IPAS centre in Drogheda on Friday. The lives of children were seriously endangered in the setting of a deliberate fire. And 2 babies, including one who was only 20 days old, were hospitalised in what was a hideous criminal attack. I know my colleagues in Drogheda, Deputy Jed Nash and Councillors Michelle Hall and P.O. Smith are working to support all those affected. And I want to pay tribute to the courage of the firefighters who saved lives on Friday night. But Minister, in the context of that horrific attack and the awful riot in City West, I want to raise 2 matters with you today. The first is how we stamp out racist violence, and the second is the way in which government policy and rhetoric emanating from members of this House can stoke anti-immigrant sentiments that form the thin end of what is a wicked, violent wedge. More than 300 IPAS and Ukraine accommodation centres operate across the country, Minister, as we know, and they are people's homes. But dozens of times now, in recent years, residents have faced attacks and violence in what are modern-day pogroms. In my own constituency, I work with volunteers who are dealing with knife attacks on men forced to sleep in tents due to your failure to house them. So the state must step in. And Minister, the government must now undertake an urgent security review of all centres where refugees or people seeking asylum are living. Completing this work in advance of the 2nd anniversary of the Dublin riots would be an appropriate deadline. But second, Minister, we need a reflection and a review of the language used in policies implemented by your government. Because the conflation of immigration with criminality and rhetoric can contribute to an environment where violence can develop. And so too can irresponsible rhetoric that blames the housing crisis or the lack of public services on immigrants. And regrettably, all 3 largest parties in this House, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin, have recently issued communications that have lent into anti-migrant sentiment. These are not comments from rogue members in government either, in the case of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. This week, the Taoiseach said our migration numbers are too high, and he implied that people facing deportation make up a significant proportion of Ireland's inward migration. And of course, this was wrong. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, though, and Fine Gael colleagues have since repeated it, and indeed your party leader, the Taoiseach, has backed him. Minister, you're in government. Any flaws in the asylum system are your responsibility. Your party colleague holds the Justice and Migration brief. And so blame for any failure to provide fair and effective procedures lies not at the feet of people seeking asylum, but with your government and with previous governments. So, Minister, will you undertake a safety audit of accommodation, and will you now advance a public information campaign on the benefits to this country of inward migration and the facts about immigration?
Thank you very much, Deputy Bacik. And the shocking and disgraceful recent attacks we've seen, including in Drogheda the weekend and City West before that, should serve as a stark reminder to everyone in this House how carefully and responsibly we must be when discussing and debating immigration policy. These disgraceful attacks are not reflective of the views of the overwhelming majority of our people, whose first instinct is one of compassion for those people being subjected to intimidation and revulsion towards those carrying out these attacks. Our people across our country are proud that Ireland is a tolerant, multicultural and diverse country, and they recognise how reliant our economy, our public services and our communities are and are the contribution from those in migrant backgrounds. I see it in my own constituency, one of the most diverse constituencies in the country, and I want to thank the enormous contribution that many people who've come here make to our economy, make to our communities and make to our society. And we need to be clear in that in all our discussions when it comes to migration. I know Minister Donoghue is publishing the Future 40 report today, which speaks to the huge contribution that many of the migrant community make to our economic growth, and our continued success as an economy is dependent on attracting the talent and the people who make that contribution. But I think it's also important to be clear, Deputy, that everybody in this House should be able to have a broader debate on what system of migration we have. And everyone on this side of the House shares with you the views on having a compassionate, caring approach to anyone who comes here, and then being treated with humanity and dignity, and many of them who've come from vulnerable places, and just to be clear about that. And the Taoiseach said that in the context of his remarks. The Taoiseach said migration is a good thing, but he just was making broader remarks on what system we have. And we should be able to have a mature debate about how what type of system we have. We're clear on it being a rules-based system, having a system of enforcement, and it's important that we have that in the context of managing a complex issue globally and everywhere else, and that's why there's constant evaluation of the various factors which are contributing to overall migration into our country. And Minister O'Callaghan has been proactive across a number of measures he's made, whilst also sending a strong message on the contribution that many people who've come here make to our economy. So to your question, there is a security review, and that's part of the wider work that goes on with any centre that becomes applicable for IPAS. And to be clear, this government, I think, shares with you your perspective on how we treat people. But it's important that we also have are able to have a debate on how we have a balanced approach, and one that's fair, and also manages the consequences for those who aren't given status.
Thank you, Minister.
And there needs to be consequences for those who aren't given status if they've appealed and they aren't allowed to stay.
Deputy Bacik.
They need to be managed in the context of a functioning migration system.
Thank you, Minister.
And that's the broader context in which this
Deputy
debate should be had.
Well, Minister, I thank you for your careful and responsible words in your response. And you're absolutely right that people, of course, must be able to debate migration policy, but let's do so in a fact-based manner. Let's use careful and responsible language. And I certainly don't think that the Taoiseach's conflation of all migration with this tiny number of people who are facing deportation orders, I don't believe that was responsible. You've acknowledged the reality that the majority of migrants, the vast majority of people who've migrated to Ireland are here to work. That our schools and our hospitals are staffed by people who've come here to provide an essential service, who are propping up our creaking healthcare, education, nursing home systems. That's what we all know to be the case. So why is there this focus in government rhetoric on scapegoating those who come here seeking asylum and somehow conflating them with the vast majority of people who are coming through a different means entirely? Just this week, Minister, we're seeing the Cabinet agreeing a mean-spirited rent payment for people who've been fleeing Putin's brutal war in Ukraine. Not a revenue-raising measure, rather Fine Gael sources have admitted this is designed to disincentivise people fleeing war from coming here. So, Minister, can we have a fact-based information campaign to provide an evidence basis for debate on migration, please?
Deputy, I think you're conflating lots of different things unfairly and inappropriately. I think it's important everyone in this House should be able to have an honest, open debate about migration policy. And government needs to examine incentives and disincentives and push and pull factors in the context of migration policy which exists in Europe and internationally. And every policy should be evaluated and recalibrated to manage the various factors which contribute to the overall levels of migration into an economy, whilst also acknowledging the huge contribution that people continue to make to our economy, to our communities. And I think it's just unfair to take a particular sentence and try and conflate what has happened in a shocking manner in certain instances. So that's why Minister O'Callaghan is correct in continuing to evaluate our migration policy, to examine the wider factors which are contributing to significant increases, and those who are working and are in centres should make a contribution. That's fair, that's proportionate. I think that's the right policy approach. And I think anyone in this House would agree, if you've income and you've means to make a contribution, you should make a contribution. I think most people across our country would support that.